Welcome back, everybody, to episode 6 of our series about the most consequential battles in history. Today, we are in a special place. Every place is special, but this one really shaped a nation. We are in Hastings. Imagine one battle that didn't just change who ruled the country, it changed what their country even was. Language, law, land ownership, architecture, even the words you're hearing now, all of that traces back to a single day in 1066. Not in Rome, not in Constantinople, but on a muddy hillside in southern England, where two armies fought over a crown and accidentally rewired a civilization. This is Hastings, the moment England stopped being Anglo-Saxon and became medieval. Consider this. The English word for beef comes from the Norman French bœuf, but cow comes from the Anglo-Saxon. Pork is French from pork, but pig is Anglo-Saxon. Mutton is French, sheep is Anglo-Saxon. Do you see the pattern here? English peasants raised the animals using their own words. Norman lords ate the meat at their tables using French words. Of course, the language of labor versus the language of luxury. In these word pairs, we see the conquest. Two peoples, one land, forever divided by class and language, yet fused by what happened on this hill. Before the battle, we need to understand what was at stake, because Anglo-Saxon England was no primitive backwater. Picture a shire court, free men gathering under an oak tree, the elderman presiding, disputes settled by neighbors who know both parties. This was local justice, participatory, immediate, rooted in community. In one generation, this will be replaced by Norman lords in stone towers, rendering justice in French to people who couldn't understand their own trials. Anglo-Saxon England emerged from the 5th century migrations of Angles, Saxons, and Jutes after Rome abandoned Britain in 410. These Germanic tribes filled the vacuum, blending with Romano-British populations over centuries. The 7 kingdoms of the Heptarchy, Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, East Anglia, Essex, Kent, and Sussex, gradually unified into one realm. By the 11th century, England had sophisticated institutions. The Witan, a council of nobles and bishops, advised the king on major decisions. No absolute rule here. This was a proto-parliament centuries before the word existed. Shire courts handled everything from theft to land claims, with juries of freemen deciding verdicts based on customs. Written law codes dated back to Ethelbert of Kent in 602, refined by Alfred the Great in the 9th century. These laws introduced wergild, blood money for crimes based on the victim's status. Kill a nobleman, higher fine than killing a peasant. But at least it was a system, rules everyone understood. If you recall, we talked about this kind of retribution, the wergild, the price of the weight of gold for a man based on his status, coming from the Viking civilization up in the north. You can go back and revisit those episodes if you like. Alfred the Great, who saved England from Viking conquest, directed all young freemen of adequate means should learn to read English. This was revolutionary, promoting literacy beyond just clergy and nobility, building an educated society that could understand both their laws and their faith. Power was distributed, not concentrated. Earls governed as royal appointees who could be replaced, not hereditary feudal lords. Free ceorls, peasant farmers, held their own plots, and remarkably, women had rights that would vanish after 1066. They could own property, inherit land, divorce their husbands, and had legal standing in court. England was wealthy. Silver pennies minted from over 70 locations funded trade with Scandinavia and the continent. The kingdom had weathered Viking invasions through Alfred's burhs, fortified towers that were precursors to castles, but defense came with a price. Danegeld, tribute paid to Vikings to buy peace. This showed England's wealth and vulnerability. England was already a crossroads. Viking invasions had evolved into settlements, and across the Danelaw, the north and east, Danish and Norse culture thrived. You can still see it in plays with name endings like by, for example, by, Derby, Whitby, and Thorpe, like Scunthorpe. Even everyday words came from Old Norse: sky, window, egg, and law. Continental ties ran deep through the church. Canterbury answered to Rome. Trade followed freely. English wool crossing to Flemish crown towns, returning as wine and luxury good. These connections grew especially strong under Edward the Confessor, raised in Norman exile, who surrounded his court with Norman advisors. Anglo-Saxon England had a rich cultural heritage. Centuries earlier, masterpieces like the Lindisfarne Gospels and treasures from the Sutton Hoo sheep burial had demonstrated sophisticated artistry rivaling Byzantium. By the 11th century, English monasteries were producing illuminated manuscripts, metalwork, and embroidery. The famous Bayeux tapestry itself was likely made by English craftswomen. English scribes maintained the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a unique historical record updated annually. As historian Mark Morris notes, Anglo-Saxon England was no Dark Age relic. It was a vibrant kingdom with institutions rivaled by few in Europe. So when a society is thriving like this, why does conquest change everything? King Edward the Confessor lay dying with no son to inherit. They called him the Confessor for his saintly devotion. He built Westminster Abbey and preferred prayer to politics. But his piety couldn't solve the crisis his childlessness created. Edward's life had been shaped by exile. When Danish King Canute seized England in 1016, young Edward fled to Normandy, spending 25 years among Norman dukes and French-speaking courts. When he returned to claim his throne in 1042, he brought Norman favorites with him. The Anglo-Saxon nobility grew resentful. The thread connecting these worlds was Edward's mother, Emma of Normandy. She'd married twice, first to Ethelred the Unready, then after his death to Canute the Dane, the very man who'd conquered England. One woman, two kings, two kingdoms. Her Norman blood created the link William would soon exploit. As Edward died, the question everyone whispered, who will rule England? Well, there were no clear rules, and here comes the problem. Anglo-Saxon England didn't practice primogeniture. The eldest son automatically inherits. Instead, the Witan elected kings from royal blood or demonstrated merit, with the church's blessing. Edward's deathbed words were frustratingly ambiguous. He commended the kingdom to Harold Godwinson, Earl of Wessex. The English heard endorsement. The Normans claimed Edward meant William. Into this ambiguity stepped three men. The first is Harold Godwinson, that he was the obvious choice. Harold controlled southern England as Earl of Wessex, the kingdom's wealthiest, most populous region. He was Edward's brother-in-law through Queen Edith, and he had a warrior's resume. In 1063, he crushed the Welsh so thoroughly that their king's own men killed him and sent his head to Edward. The day after Edward died, January 6, 1066, the Witan elected Harold king. He was crowned that same day at Westminster Abbey. Harold represented continuity, the natural succession. But there was a problem. William, Duke of Normandy, the oath-breaker's enemy. William claimed Edward had promised him the throne back in 1051, but promises are easy to dispute. What William needed was something more damning, and he had it: Harold's oath. In 1064, Harold was shipwrecked off the French coast. Count Guy captured him and handed him to William. What happened next is recorded in the Bayeux Tapestry. Norman propaganda, but our most vivid visual source. According to the tapestry, Harold swore to support William's claim, placing his hands on holy relics. Norman chronicler William of Poitiers adds a sinister detail. The relics were hidden beneath a cloth. Harold didn't realize how sacred his oath was until William dramatically pulled the cloth away, revealing saints' bones beneath Harold's hands. True? Invented? We'll never know, but the message was clear. Harold was an oath breaker, a perjurer who swore before God and claimed the crown for himself. In medieval Christianity, breaking a sacred oath was a mortal sin. William took his case to Pope Alexander II, who blessed the invasion and sent a papal banner. This transformed a dynastic squabble into holy war, God himself declaring Harold unfit and William righteous. Or so the Normans claimed. This papal blessing appears only in Norman sources, which makes it suspect. But for William's purposes, the narrative was what mattered. And then we have another contender, Harald Hardrada, the Thunderbolt. The third claimant was the most dangerous, Harald Hardrada, King of Norway. The sagas claim he stood 6 feet 6, a giant who spent his life chasing glory from one end of the world to the other. His claim rested on a 1046 treaty with Magnus of Norway, who had inherited rights from Canute's North Sea Empire. Legally thin, but Harald Hardrada didn't need legal arguments. This was a man who'd served in the Varangian Guard in Constantinople, fought in Russia and Sicily. Now in his 50s, he wanted one last crown worthy of the sagas. And then we have another character who appears to be marginal but still is mentioned, the boy who should have been king. There was a fourth candidate, Edward the Atheling, a 14-year-old with the strongest blood claim as Edward's great-nephew. But the Witan looked at this child and saw disaster. England faced wolves at the gate. They needed a warrior and not a boy. Edgar was passed over. After Hastings, desperate nobles would briefly proclaim him king, too little too late. The boy king, who never ruled, would live into old age, watching from the margins as others shaped the kingdom that should have been his. But there is something else. Somehow the sky warned them. In April 1066, Halley's comet blazed across the skies, the heavens. Visible for weeks, the Bayeux Tapestry shows it. A fiery streak above Harold's throne, terrified people pointing upward. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle called it a portent. Medieval people saw comets as messages from God announcing war, plague, of course, in their case, the death of kings. They were right to be afraid. Most people remember 1066 as one battle, but they were wrong. England endured 3 major battles in 3 weeks, each bleeding Harold's army more, each victory making the next fight harder. The first battle, Fulford Gate, on September 20th. While Harold watched the southern coast for William, the blow came from the north. Harald Hardrada's 300 longships sailed up the Humber, calling 6,000 to 8,000 warriors. And he wasn't alone. Sailing beside him was Tostig Godwitson, Harold's own brother. Tostig had been Earl of Northumbria in 1065 when his subjects revolted against his tyranny and drove him out. He'd begged Harold to restore him by force. Harold refused, choosing peace over family. Now Tostig had joined England's enemies. On September 20th, the northern earls, Edwin of Mercia and Morcar of Northumbria, met them at Fulford Gate outside York. The Vikings outflanked the English and drove them into the marshes. Men drowned in their armor, York lay defenseless. News reached Harold in London, Vikings in the north, William's fleet waiting for winds in the south. He faced an impossible choice: stay south and let Vikings take York, or march north and risk William landing behind him. Harold chose speed. Battle 2, Stamford Bridge, September 25th. Harold's mounted army covered 185 miles from London to Yorkshire in only 4 days of forced marching. It was an extraordinary achievement, and it took the Vikings completely by surprise. September 25th was hot. The Vikings had left their mail armor at the ships, too heavy in the heat. When Harold's army appeared on the horizon, they weren't ready. Then came the legend. According to the sagas, a single Viking berserker held the narrow bridge, killing dozens with his axe. No one could pass until an English soldier floated beneath the bridge in a barrel and thrust a spear upward through the planks. Did it happen? The story appears 150 years later after the battle. But even if it's myth, it captures the desperate ferocity of that day. Once across, the English slaughtered the unarmored Vikings. Harald Hardrada fell, struck by an arrow in the throat while composing poetry. Very Viking, very Hardrada. The sagas record this final verse: "We march forward without mailcoats. The lack of armor doomed them." Then came the moment that haunts history. Harold offered Tostig a chance to reconcile. Tostig, though, asks a particular question. What would my ally, Harald Hardrada, what would he have received? Harold's reply was dark poetry. He says 6 feet of English ground, or 7, since he's taller than most men, a grave, and that's what he offered the giant Norwegian king. Tostig refused. Then he died fighting beside the Norwegians, choosing loyalty to his new allies over the brother who refused him. The victory was total. Of 300 Viking ships that sailed up the Humber, only 24 were needed to carry survivors home. But Harold's army paid a price too: 5,000 dead or wounded, including many elite housecarls, the professional warriors who formed his army's core. 4 days later, we have the worst news. Harold was celebrating in York when messengers arrived, breathless and terrified. September 28, William's invasion fleet had reached English shores at Pevensey. William's fleet carried 7,000 men, 2,000-3,000 heavy cavalry, the rest infantry and archers. He'd built a castle at Hastings, securing his beachhead. Then he raided Sussex. Harold owned earldom, burning villages, seizing supplies. This was a deliberate provocation designed to force Harold south before he could gather reinforcements. And it worked. Harold raced south with his Vikings, and they were exhausted. They already marched 185 miles north and fought a brutal battle. Now they had to cover 240 miles south in less than 2 weeks. Do the math. In 3 weeks, Harold's forces marched 425 miles and fought 2 major engagements. His housecarls were depleted. Those who survived Stamford Bridge carried wounds and exhaustion. The northern earls, Edwin and Morcar, were too slow. Their battered forces never caught up. Their southern feared there would be the free militias couldn't be fully recalled. Harold gathered what he could, perhaps 5,000 to 7,000 men at Hastings, down from the 10,000–15,000 he commanded at Stamford Bridge. Some historians argue he should have waited in London, forcing William to come to him. But William was burning Harold's lands, killing Harold's people. What king would wait while his kingdom burned? Harold had won at Stamford Bridge through speed and surprise. Now he would try the same tactic against William. As historian David Howard writes, Harold's speed was his strength and of course was also his doom. a king worn thin by duty facing fresh foes with a tired army. Victory at Stamford Bridge sealed defeat at Hastings. That's the cruel arithmetic of 1066. The armies that met at Hastings represented fundamentally opposed visions of warfare itself. Anglo-Saxon warfare was built on a simple principle: stand together or die together. The heart of Harold's army was the housecarls, 3,000 professional warriors. Though depleted from Stamford Bridge, these weren't conscripts. They were full-time soldiers, paid retainers who dedicated their lives to military service. They formed a brotherhood bound by oath and blood. They wore mail hauberks, knee-length chain armor weighing 30 to 40 pounds, round shields on their left arms, and in their hands the weapon that made them legendary, the Dane axe, a two-handed weapon that could cut through a horse skull and the rider behind it. Devastating. But to swing it, you had to drop your shield. Their tactics was the shield wall, the iron wall, as the sources call it. Shields interlocked, overlapping like scales. Spears protruded through the gaps. Behind the shields, axes waited. It was communal defense, no individual heroics, but just solidarity, just holding the line. Even the thegns, the nobles who could afford horses, dismounted to fight in the wall. This was Germanic tradition, free warriors defending their community as equals. Behind the housecarls stood the fyrd, the part-time militia of free men, farmers and craftsmen with spears and crude shields, motivated but less trained, and, of course, at this point, they were exhausted from the march. William's army was something else entirely. The Normans had on the field combined arms, different troops working in coordination. Infantry with spears held the line, archers provided ranged fire, and at the core, heavy cavalry. Norman knights rode destriers, war horses bred specifically for battle, standing 14-16 hands high, trained to charge into massed infantry without flinching, to bite and kick. A destrier could cost 7 to 20 times the price of an ordinary horse, a fortune when laborers earned £2 a year. Training took years. These weren't farm horses, they were weapons. The knights themselves were walking fortresses, knee-length mail hauberks, often with mail coifs protecting their heads, conical helmets with nasal guards, kite shields protecting their left side from neck to toe, lances for the shock charge, then swords and maces for close combat. That's over half a ton of muscle, metal, and fury thundering toward the shield wall. The momentum alone would be devastating. This was feudalism as a military system. Norman vassals owed their duke 40 days of service per year, creating a professional warrior class constantly honing their skills. These men had fought everywhere in southern Italy since 1017, founding kingdoms in Sicily. They battled the Bretons, Angevins, the French king himself. Constant warfare had created tactical sophistication. My own town, founded around the year 711, and in the 1100s there is a fortress on top of the hill that is called Corigliano. You can go and check for yourself in southern Italy, Calabria. There is an actual Norman castle. The battle plan. Archers forced defenders to raise shields, creating gaps. Infantry pinned the enemy. Then cavalry shock charges exploding weaknesses, breaking formations through mass and momentum. And here we have two different philosophies of war. The English approach was defensive, communal. Stand together, die together if necessary. Hold the line. Never break faith with your shield brothers. The Norman approach was offensive, hierarchical, mobile. Individual prowess mattered, but discipline enabled victory. It was brutal efficiency. And here's the irony. The Normans were descended from Vikings, Northmen, Norse raiders who'd settled in France after Rollo's treaty in 911. In 5 generations that abandoned long ships for horses, Norse for French, pagan gods for Christ. But they kept that Scandinavian ferocity, Vikings who learned to fight on horseback. When tradition meets innovation, which prevails? Hastings would answer, and the answer would shape warfare for the next 5 centuries. And here we approach the day of the battle, October 14, 1066, on the Senlac Hill, 7 miles inland from Hastings. By nightfall, this hill would have a new name, Battle. Harold arrived first and chose well. His 7,000 exhausted men occupied the ridge at Senlac Hill. Steep slopes fell away on either side. Marshy ground choked the valley. Woods protected the flanks. Behind them, the vast Androswell forest offered escape if needed. The shield wall stretched across the ridge's narrowest point, maybe 600 yards wide. Housecarls in the center where fighting would be the heaviest, feared militias on the wings. Harold had every advantage terrain could give. William's 7,000 men would have to attack uphill. Cavalry charges lose momentum climbing slopes. Arrows shot uphill have shorter range. Physics favored the defenders. Harold had one disadvantage: time. His army was exhausted, supplies limited, reinforcements days away. William freshly landed with ships full of provisions. He could wait. Harold couldn't. And here we go into the toughest parts of the battle. A battle that lasted 9 hours. 9 hours of hell. William deployed in 3 divisions, Bretons on the left, Normans in the center under his command, French and Flemish mercenaries on the right. The archers struck first. Thousands of arrows darkened the sky going toward the ridge, but physics betrayed them. Shooting uphill, the shafts lost force, bouncing off shields and armor. From behind the wall, English voices rose in mockery. Next, infantry. Norman foot soldiers charged uphill, hitting the shield wall with spears and swords. The English repelled them, spears thrusting between the shields, axes rising and falling, bodies piled at the wall's base. The Normans fell back. Then came the cavalry. The ground shook. 2,000 armored warriors on war-trained horses, lances leveled, thundering uphill. Picture the sound. Hooves on earth, armor rattling, men screaming. The moment before impact when time slows and every warrior knows this is when he lives or dies. The shield wall still held. Horses impaled on spears, screaming. Riders pulled from saddles and hacked down. The Dane axe proved its worth. A single swing could kill a horse and rider together. The cavalry retreated. This pattern repeated for hours. Arrows, infantry, cavalry. Each time the English held, each time the Normans fell back. But holding takes a toll. The defenders were already exhausted. Every attack drained them even more. And here we have a turning point. Mid-morning, disaster struck. Or was it genius? The Norman left wing, the Bretons broke and ran. Whether genuine panic or calculated retreat, sources disagree. Part of the English line probably feared the militia, saw Normans fleeing and couldn't resist. They broke ranks, charged downhill, chased the retreating group, abandoning the shield wall, abandoning the high ground. The Norman cavalry wheeled around and cut them down. Isolated from the main army, the English pursuers were slaughtered in minutes. Hundreds died on that slope. The shield wall had broken. Harold's housecarls in the center held firm, closed the gaps. The line stabilized. But William had learned a tactic that could break the English. Feign retreat, make them chase you, kill them when they're isolated. He would use it again. Hours passed, and the battle extended into the afternoon. Medieval battles didn't usually last this long. Most were decided in an hour or 2. Hastings continued to show how evenly matched these armies were, how desperately each side wanted victory. The Normans tried the feigned retreat again and again. Each time the English broke ranks to pursue. Each time fewer returned. The shield grew thinner and thinner, gaps harder to close. William had his own close call. During a charge, someone struck his helmet. The blow didn't kill him, but rumors spread. The Duke is dead. If William died, the invasion died with him. No Duke, no pay, no point. William yanked off his helmet, showing his face, shouting, "Look at me, I live, and I will conquer with God's aid." He rode among the troops, visible, alive. The Normans rallied. Think about that moment. The entire invasion, England's future, all resting on one man, proving he wasn't dead. Meanwhile, the archers adjusted. Instead of shooting straight, they switched to high-angle volleys. Arrows fell from above onto packed English ranks. Shields protected against frontal attacks, less against plunging fire. Men started falling behind the wall, never seeing the arrow that killed them. Late afternoon, the sun declining, the English line thinning, exhausted, bleeding from 8,000 cuts. Men had been fighting for 9 hours, 9 hours of raising shields, thrusting spears, swinging axes. Try holding your arms up for 9 hours, just holding them up. Now imagine doing it with 40 pounds of mail while people will try to kill you. And then Harold fell. How he died is one of history's great mysteries. The story everyone knows, arrow through the eye, is almost certainly wrong. The Bayeux tapestry shows a figure labeled Harold, clutching something near his face. An arrow? Maybe. But 18th century engravings of the tapestry show this figure holding a spear, not an arrow. The arrow appears first in Charles Stothard's 1816 reproduction, possibly added during restoration. Moreover, which figure is Harold? The standing man clutching his face, or the warrior to the right being hacked down by cavalry? The Latin inscription, "King Harold is killed," appears above both figures. Contemporary written sources make no mention of an arrow. The earliest written mention comes from Badri of Bourgueil, around 1100, 34 years after the battle. He might have seen the tapestry and described it, or he might have heard legends. The arrow story might be symbolic. Medieval art often showed oath-breakers dying with weapons through the eye, divine judgment made visible. Harold, the oath-breaker, struck down for his sin, a morality tale woven into propaganda. But what do we know? Harold died in late afternoon. His royal banner fell. His brothers were already dead. The housecarls fought on around their king's body until overwhelmed, dying where they stood rather than abandon Harold in death. With Harold dead and the standard fallen, the English line broke. Survivors fled into the Andredswelds forest. The Normans pursued, but darkness and unfamiliar terrain ended the chase. At a steep ravine, later called Malfosse, Evil Ditch, some English turned and fought a final ambush before melting into the woods. Small victories in a lost cause. William had won, but the prize was staggering. Modern estimates see numbers: 2,000 Norman dead, nearly 30% casualties, English losses, 4,000 including their king, his two brothers, and the flower of Anglo-Saxon nobility. The housecarls, almost to a man, lay dead on the Senlac Hill. Harold's corpse was mutilated in the fighting. William, furious at this dishonor, punished the knights responsible. Some accounts claim Edith Swanneck, Harold's common-law wife, identified his body by intimate marks known only to her. Where was he buried? Sources conflict. Some say Watman Abbey, which Harold had founded. Others say Beauchamp. Some claim William initially refused Christian burial to an oath-breaker, having the body thrown on the beach to guard the coast he failed to defend. The truth is lost, like so much about Harold. His end is shrouded in conflicting stories. As Mark Morris notes, Hastings was no foregone conclusion. Exhaustion and tactical errors decided it. History often turns on such moments. Most conquests replace rulers. This one replaced a civilization. And here we go into our last reflection note, the road not taken. History pivots on moments. What if Harold had won? And we have a few scenarios. Scenario 1, Harold waits. Instead of rushing south exhausted, Harold waits in London, gathering reinforcement. Edwin and Morcar's northern forces join him. The southern third swells his ranks to 15 to 20,000. William, besieging London with 7,000, faces a larger army in a fortified city. The Normans, far from home, supplies running low as winter approaches, face guerrilla attacks. William must retreat or risk destruction. He retreats. The invasion fails. What follows? England remains Saxon, more Germanic, more Scandinavian. The Witten system continues, perhaps strengthening. Language? Well, English remains closer to Dutch and German. No massive French vocabulary. Modern English might resemble Frisian. Continental ties will be weaker. Without Norman connection, England's focus stays northern. Trade with Scandinavia and the Baltic, less entanglement with France, no 100 Years' War. England is a North Sea power, not a continental player. Feudalism will be delayed or different, and Saxon England's distributed land ownership might persist longer, creating different social structures. Scenario 2. What if Hardrada, Harald Hardrada, had won? Imagine Harold loses in Yorkshire. Hardrada takes York, consolidates power in the Danelaw. England splits, Viking north, Saxon south, Norman invasion incoming. If Hardrada wins overall, England becomes part of a renewed Scandinavian empire. Norwegian language, Norse law. The Vikings proved they could rule England under Canute. They did it before. Another Danish-Norwegian England wasn't impossible. But it will be very different, more connected to Iceland, Norway, Denmark, less France, and Rome, more Scandinavian. And scenario 3, the shield wall on that day holds. Imagine those English troops don't pursue the retreating Normans. The shield wall holds unbroken until nightfall. Both armies withdraw exhausted. Stalemate. William can conquer without winning decisively. Harold can't expel William without risking another engagement. Winter approaches, negotiations begin. Perhaps a compromise. William receives lands as a powerful vassal. Harold keeps the throne but must manage Norman ambitions. An uneasy peace, probably temporary. Or William sails home, waits, tries again later, or never. And this is the great question. Many historians argue Harold should have won home territory, defensive positions, veteran troops. William attacked uphill with a weary army after a risky channel crossing. But Harold's exhaustion from Stamford Bridge, the broken shield wall, tactical errors, these were not predetermined. They were choices and accidents in the chaos of war, of battle. As Churchill wrote, rarely has the fate of a nation turned on so narrow a hinge. At Hastings, England wasn't just conquered, it was created. Out of the ashes rose something neither fully Norman nor fully Saxon, but a fusion that would shape the world, a language that would become global, a legal system that would define democracy, institutions, parliament, common law, constitutional monarchy that would spread to 5 continents. But this creation came at a terrible cost, tens of thousands of deaths, and an entire ruling class dispossessed, communities destroyed, languages suppressed. The trauma echoed for centuries. The Normans won with cavalry and castles, but they couldn't erase what they conquered. Saxon law, language and customs persisted, eventually resurfacing, blending with Norman to create something new. And here's a little bit of a tongue twister. The conquered conquered their conquerors through persistence. Today, When British judges cite medieval precedents, when American legislators quote Magna Carta, when anyone uses words like justice or parliament or common law, they're speaking the language of Hastings. 9 centuries later, we're still living in the world Hastings made. Every time you use the word beef instead of cow, you're speaking the conquest. Every time a jury decides a verdict, you're inheriting Saxon justice filtered through Norman administration. Every time English is spoken anywhere on earth, Hastings echoes. One battle, one day, October 14th, 1066, the day that made England. Well, next time we leave the muddy fields of England for the scorching deserts of the Holy Land, Jerusalem, the Third Crusade, Saladin versus Richard the Lionheart, the Battle of Hattin, where religious fervor met military genius, and the result changed the balance between Christianity and Islam forever. I will see you there. Thank you very much for following up. Bye.